Tell us a little bit about the space. Kind of, you've seen it grow up, like you were just saying. You were there whenever it started, and you've seen it grow up. Can you tell us a little bit about the space?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the first thing is it goes back right now almost 105 years. It was 1921 when the code came out, and at that point it wasn't even a Section 1031. And back then, most everything between then and say the 60s were concurrent closings, so the sales and the purchases all closed concurrently. Um, that was kind of the wild, wild west. I got into it in the mid 19, almost early 1980s, and the regulations still hadn't come out. So people got really creative back then. 1986 Tax Act came out, and that's where it eliminated a lot of the benefits of real estate. So the 1031 really kind of took off after 1986, and from there it's grown quite a bit. I guess one thing for listeners to know is that the 1031 exchange qualified intermediary industry has no licensing, no regulatory oversight capabilities, or anything like that. So QIs are just not licensed or regulated unless they go down a different path.
So why is that? I mean, you talk about it, and it is an industry. It seems like in the real estate space, especially, a lot of people are licensed, right? Like they manage all of that, and now you're talking about these people are involved in the transaction, um, fairly significantly. So, do you have any idea why it hasn't been?
Yeah, I'm one of the founders of the industry trade group, the Federation of Exchange Accommodators. And over the years, we have asked federal and state regulators to regulate us. And the response is almost identical that the loss ratio is not high enough to warrant any kind of regulatory oversight, et cetera. I would disagree with that. I've seen a number of losses over those years, and almost all of them would have been prevented had there been regulatory oversight. The big one, of course, was Land America. They were the one of the big five in terms of title insurance, escrow, 1031 exchanges, and other services. And their qualified intermediary took the entire company down because of what they invested in. So regulatory oversight is critical, but they just don't want to regulate us. So the only way to get regulated is going down a different path.
Hey, Bill, I've got a question for you. We've got investors that are all across the spectrum of their real estate journey. We've got newbies, we've got experienced investors. So for those newbie investors, can you explain what like a 1031 exchange is, and also what a qualified intermediary is and what they do?
Sure. And I guess the best way to describe it is kind of with an example. So a lot of newbies, they'll buy, one single family home. They own it, rent it out. Somewhere along the way, they decide, hey, I like this business. I like being a landlord. And maybe they're ready to sell the one single family and then maybe buy a duplex or a fourplex or trade up. Or maybe instead of owning one single family, they sell one and buy two or three or four single families. So they diversify. And if they just sold that original single family, they would incur quite a bit of capital gain taxes, depreciation, recapture taxes, et cetera. So the 1031 exchange allows them to sell that original single family and defer the payment of all those taxes. So they don't have to pay capital gain or depreciation recapture taxes as long as they reinvest in other investment properties. So they're really trading equal or up in value by reinvesting. And the IRS allows them to defer the payment of taxes if they do that. So it's really all about deferring the taxes, keeping all of their equity in their pocket, which makes it a lot easier to then reinvest in either more units, more properties, larger value properties, things like that. And the IRS does not allow the individual taxpayer to hold the money. So they've kind of set up this qualified intermediary. Some people call them accommodators or facilitators, and it's kind of like the quarterback in the 1031 exchange process. So we as a qualified intermediary, we plug into the investor's team. We work with you guys. We work with their realtor. We work with their title and escrow company or closing attorney. And our role is just to draft the documents, to structure the 1031 exchange. When the closing of their sale occurs, the funds are wired to us. We hold those funds until they're ready to reinvest in the replacement property. And then at that point, we'll wire the funds to whoever's handling the closing. So we're kind of very similar to an escrow company or title company or closing attorney. But the only thing we handle is just the 1031 exchange aspect of the overall transaction.
And to
Kind
follow
of
up on
funny.
that, so for these newbie investors, when they're looking for, they've heard the phrase 1031, and they're trying to find a partner or an intermediary to vet. What are some things that they should be looking for when they're trying to find that partner? Because you've got options. Everybody's got options. We got everything at the click of a button on our within our pocket. So what should they be looking for when they're trying to find someone that can handle the 1031 exchange?
Great question. And it is funny. A lot of people just kind of Google something, talk to somebody, and they choose a company, and they don't really realize what the risks are. So I guess number one would be regulation. And we went down that path. We decided to better protect the clients, you've got to be regulated. And the reason for that is with regulation, you have regulators who come in and do an annual examination. They check everything. And that makes sure that you're operating in a safe and sound manner. You're following your policies and procedures. You're not taking undue risks. And with regulation, if you're doing something that you should not be doing, they're going to put you under either a memorandum of understanding or a cease and desist if it's really bad, and they'll close you down. So you can't take risks like other companies might. So regulation is, I think, number one. As I said before, all the companies I've seen fail would not have failed had there been regulatory oversight. So look for somebody who has some form of licensing or regulatory oversight. In our case, we went down the banking channel, so we took a couple of years. I mean, it takes a while, but we took a couple of years of going through the reviews and exams and background checks and all of that through the division of banking, and ultimately ended up with our own trust company charter, and that's Exeter Trust Company. So that allows us to hold the funds in a regulated entity. Having said that, everybody's human and they all make mistakes. So you also want to check the insurance and the bonding. And it's amazing that the investors who do look at that, they focus on fidelity bond. And fidelity bond is important. I mean, that's crime insurance, misappropriation of funds, theft, embezzlement, things like that. But that's not the most important. Everybody's human, they make mistakes. That's what happens most frequently. We do a lot of expert witness work, and most of the stuff we get involved with stems from, a qualified intermediary who made a mistake. It created a loss for the taxpayer, and from there it just got nasty. So you want to make sure there's errors and omissions insurance to cover the QI in case there's a goof and it creates a loss. You also want to make sure there's fidelity bond coverage. The big threat today is cyber and wire fraud. I mean, these hackers are getting really sophisticated in how they can try to change the wire transfer instructions and intercept emails and forward those on. So you want to make sure they have cyber fraud and wire fraud insurance as well. So those are critical. And then the third one would be make sure that the funds are held in a qualified trust account or a qualified escrow account. Those are specifically authorized by the Treasury regulations. And for those who want to do research, go back and look at the Land America 1031 exchange. The entire company was forced to file bankruptcy. The judge ruled that the funds were actually corporate funds, not client trust funds, because they were held in Land America's corporate name. Now that works from a 1031 exchange perspective, but when you end up in bankruptcy, not so good. And the judge also said, had they used a qualified trust or qualified escrow account, he would have ruled differently. So those are probably the three most important things to look at. Certainly look at longevity. How long have they been around? Look at their online reviews, things like that. Use your judgment. Don't look necessarily at fees. I had a client call yesterday and they said, well, you're $100 more expensive than this other guy we're looking at. Yeah, but the other guy's not regulated. They're not licensed. They don't have the bonding that we have, et cetera. You're going to risk all of that for $100. That just doesn't make sense.